Okay, everybody, welcome to Truth in Accounting's Ask the Experts webinar. Thanks to the Union League Club of Chicago for co-sponsoring. Today's topic is the Department of Defense, or DoD, and its financial affairs. The webinar aligns with Truth in Accounting's newly released Defense Department Audit Report Card, which I'll get more into later. My name is Bill Bergman. I'm the Director of Research for Truth in Accounting. We're a nonprofit dedicated to helping citizens understand government finance with a view to promoting truthful government financial reporting at the local, state, and federal levels. You can learn more about us at our website, where you can also sign up for our morning call newsletter. That's a compilation of news, financial news for governments that I compile every morning. I'm not going to be your moderator today, as usual. Your host for today is Courtney Bublé. Courtney is a staff correspondent who covers federal management oversight. Before joining Government Executive, where she worked with NBC News. Courtney graduated from George Washington University in 2018, and she's going to be managing all your questions as well as keeping me and Mandy in check. I'll turn it over to Courtney now to introduce our other expert and more about our program. Courtney?
Well, thank you, Bill. We are honored today to have Mandy Smithberger as one of our experts. Mandy has been the director of the Center for Defense Information at the Project on Government Oversight since 2014. Previously, she was a national security policy advisor to Representative Jackie Speier of California. There, she worked on passing key provisions of the Military Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act to getting that into law. Mandy is an expert on national security, Pentagon reform, and the defense industry's revolving door. She's appeared recently on CNN, Fox News, and NPR. She's also been cited in outlets such as the New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, and Government Executive. As Bill stated, everyone will have the chance to ask questions via the Q&A feature on Zoom. If you look towards the bottom of your screen and hover your mouse, you'll see a panel. You can type in your questions there, and hopefully we'll get to as many as we can. So first, let's let our experts talk a little bit more about the Defense Department's financial situation. So I'll turn it over to Bill first for comments.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Courtney. Appreciate it. And thanks both to you and Mandy for joining us today. Thanks to everybody in the audience too. We look forward to learning from you as well and your questions. What are we talking about? We're talking about a government entity that spends more than $700 billion of our money every year. It's worth stressing up front that defense spending, quote unquote, defense spending is a lot higher than DoD budget, given that so much related spending and accumulating debt arrives outside of the Department of Defense, including in the Department of Veteran Affairs, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Energy, a longer story. Bottom line, though, we're talking about a massive amount of our money spent every year, an amount, unfortunately, that we really don't have a reliable total for, given the accounting and related financial management issues at the Department of Defense. It may be so fundamental that I think it's worth questioning whether U.S. Treasury securities deserve their reputation for being, quote, risk-free, unquote. Putting aside important questions about the sustainability of our government's fiscal path at the federal level in general, today we're going to be stressing the uncertainty associated with the accounting and financial management problems at the Department of Defense. Along these lines, I'm reminded of a great economist, Frank Knight, and his concept of what was called over time, Knightian uncertainty. What Knight distinguished between risk and uncertainty. Risk is when you're rolling dice and you know the odds. Uncertainty is when you're faced with more ambiguous circumstances, and it's in that latter arena that we're dipping our toes into today. Fundamentally, how many people in the United States are aware of the fact that the United States federal government has basically flunked the audit of its financial statements every year for decades? Not too many people really know this or appreciate the issues associated with it. And fundamentally, the Department of Defense is one of the main reasons why this has happened. Going back to 1990, the background includes the fact that Congress passed something called the Chief Financial Officers Act, which called for audits of financial statements for all federal government departments. But they only had to have the audit if the department declared that it was ready for the audit. And for more than 2 decades, the DoD was either unable or unwilling or both to make that claim until 2018, which was an important year and hopefully a step towards establishing better grounds for public trust. That was the year that the DoD first developed its full department-wide audit. It was a massive undertaking, and it's one that spends all by itself, roughly $1 billion a year. Hopefully, America is going to get a return on that investment. What are the results so far of the auditing efforts? Well, at bottom line, we've had 3 consecutive years of disclaimers of opinion on the financial statements in the Department of Defense agency-wide financial report. A disclaimer of opinion is basically a flunk opinion on the audit. Does that mean that the effort hasn't been worthwhile? No, not necessarily. The auditors and the DoD entities are still all on a kind of a learning curve. They have so much to learn about how to fix and improve the financial management and auditing processes in the Department of Defense. They've been finding more problems than they solve, and that happened in the latest audit as well. The overall number of identified material weaknesses and issues with non-compliance and auditor findings remain very high, but the problems are being identified and addressed, and in that sense, we're making some progress. At Truth in Accounting, we just issued our annual DoD audit report card. This is an effort to dive into the results of that massive effort, review the results, and rank the 18 or so DoD entities that we identify on their performance on the audit. We identify entities like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that actually perform well. It's not a complete disaster. There are good entities that other entities within DoD can learn from, and the Army Corps of Engineers is one of those. But at the bottom of the table that in our rankings, the main service departments, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, they all still have a lot of room for improvement. The latest year was kind of challenging for all of us in society, including for the DoD audit effort. Auditing isn't just a spreadsheet or word processing exercise. You got to get out there and kick the tires in auditing. And the field visits were down significantly this year amidst the pandemic. The overall effort took a little longer than it did last year, but at the end of the day, they did get it completed. We have yet to see significant improvement in the overall results, but again, under the surface, I think we're getting some progress. By way of background too, I got to share a former US Senator from Illinois, Paul Douglas, a great guy. He had a reputation for being a liberal. He wrote a fabulous book back in 1952 called Economy in the National Government. One of his lines in this book was, a liberal is not a wastrel. And Douglas had a stern and energetic effort to criticize and recommend improvements in DoD financial management. And there's some lessons in that book for the efforts today. He called for better oversight in the Congress and in society for the military spending in the United States. Along those lines, we're gifted today with a real expert, and that's Mandy Smithberger, who's with a great nonprofit, the Project on Government Oversight. Mandy?
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to be part of this conversation. I think it's particularly timely as we are about to see the top line numbers from the Biden administration about what kind of budget we're going to see across the federal government, including the Department of Defense. As likely many people on this call know, this is going to be our first year where we don't have the Budget Control Act, which put nominal caps on defense spending. And we're hearing largely that it's likely that the budget is going to stay relatively flat. I think what's important to keep in mind for the audit in particular is that while the department has come to embrace this effort, it's never been something that they've loved. So as they are looking for opportunities for savings, I think that this is going to be a particularly important arena for the public and Congress to stay focused on, to make sure that they're going to continue to build on the progress that they have in the past. You know, Bill mentioned that this is costing about $1 billion per year. Those who are less enthusiastic about this effort are likely to try and claim that this is even more costly as the department makes remediation and different changes in response to what the audit findings are. So it's going to be up to all of us to hold the department accountable for not trying to hide the ball and understanding what the real problems are here and making sure that we address them. One of the major debates we've been having in the budget space is, you know, what are the costs of having legacy systems? Well, on the audit space, the cost of legacy systems are particularly pernicious. The IT structures that we're using for these systems is a large part of why it's been so difficult for the department to move forward in their mismanagement of these programs. I'm also just happy to have the opportunity to talk about, okay, what do we need to make sure that we have for a proper oversight infrastructure moving forward? And there are two major areas I would highlight. One is that it's been many years since we've had a permanent Department of Defense Inspector General to be overseeing the department completely. And I think that we're seeing it with a number of Biden administration nominees that they're coming in rather slowly, but this should be a top priority one that, particularly when we're looking at how much spending the Pentagon does every year, that we need to make sure that we have watchdogs in place to make sure that money is being spent responsibly. The end of the Budget Control Act also means that we have an opportunity to potentially get rid of the Overseas Contingency Operations account, which has been a slush fund for the department to circumvent those budget caps, putting in a number of programs that have absolutely nothing to do with emergency spending or unanticipated costs. I think there's real appetite and bipartisan support for getting rid of this and getting the department on a stronger fiscal footing. And then we need to look at how are we empowering truth tellers in the department to be able to tell the public and Congress about what is actually happening. And we need to see much stronger whistleblower protections, particularly for members of the military who have the worst protections. They have a higher burden of proof to show that they've been retaliated against. And even when it's been shown that they have been retaliated against, it's extraordinarily rare for anyone to ever be held accountable. That is not a system that is set up for accountability and being responsive to the public. And so we're really hoping that one of the top priorities for Congress is going to be strengthening those protections. I'm excited for this conversation and to help answer any questions people have.
Great. Okay, now we'll go into the question and answer section. Just a reminder, you can submit your questions at the bottom of the Zoom. Just click the Q&A button. So the first question I'm going to start with, it's a bit general, but back in November, Pentagon officials said that they think the department will have a clean audit by 2027. Do you think that that's a realistic goal? Why or why not?
You go ahead and start, Bill.
I think it's realistic if we do get a genuine effort out of the department to actually get excited about this challenge. That is a good one for them to embrace positively. I think it can happen. Having said that, just because a clean opinion arrives, that isn't necessarily a good state of affairs all by itself. A clean opinion is an opinion that you're complying with GAAP, but one development that we've had at DOD is with the financial accounting standards for the federal government is that there's a new standard that allows greater scope for uncertainty or hiding things behind national security issues. That so it's easier to have a clean audit, for instance, for that reason. But and at the end of the day, generally accepted accounting principles aren't always good things to comply with. We've learned at state and local government levels, for instance, that GAAP is actually a source of a problem, not a solution historically, and that can be the same case in DOD. One of the largest liabilities on the balance sheet of the United States government is federal employee and veteran benefits payable, for instance. And a few years ago, there was a $378 billion loss in the federal government's income statement simply because they changed the assumptions on how to calculate veteran benefits, which, again, we're in this world of Knightian uncertainty sometimes in trying to decide what is or isn't defense spending. And so, again, a clean audit, it's a step certainly in the right direction, but it's not the only answer.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. But I think when we're looking at just how long it's going to take, it's another one of those areas that I think to the ordinary citizen, who they're paying their taxes every year, feel like they're being pretty accountable, especially when some are talking about trying to increase the budget 3 to 5% per year. When you have such weak internal controls, when there's inadequate oversight, both in the audit space and, we're also concerned that there's insufficient contract audit oversight happening as well. I think that the department needs to go much further to make the case that they are deserving of more taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, it's a glass half full versus glass half empty scenario. In the more cynical or sad interpretation, we shouldn't be happy. Maybe this is something that should have happened 25 years ago, not 4 years away from now. We need it sooner than later.
Got it. So I see a few questions now about FASAB Statement 56, asking for your interpretation of it. What do you think it means? So if you could just give a little background about what this, Standard 56, what it is and what your interpretation is.
That is all you, Bill.
That's the standard that I refer to. That it provides scope for not reporting financial matters that matter in the event of national security exceptions. And there are important reasons to both respect the importance of doing that in a good way, but also we also have more uncertainty as citizens and taxpayers whether or not this exception can be abused for corruption and wasteful spending.
Great. Now, talking a little bit more about legacy systems, can you say whether or not this is really a reason why they haven't passed the audits, or is it a component of larger issues? But if you could just talk about how the legacy systems, which are 10, 20 years out of date in many instances, how that could impact the audit process and the failing.
Sure, I can go ahead and start, and Bill can kind of build on what I was saying. But so I think it is a real issue but I think it's become such a big issue because this has not generally been a priority for the department, that this having strong financial accountability and management has not been their priority. And so the problem has been exacerbated. You see the Government Accountability Office continue to highlight financial management as a high risk area for the department. Some progress is made, but there's still a long way to go.
I think it's interesting, the lessons you can get from financial markets and banking regulation or financial crises. For instance, the 2008-2009 financial crisis was sometimes called a quote perfect storm of circumstances, or the implication there is that this isn't a human issue; it's Mother Nature or something. I'm afraid blaming legacy systems is you're blaming technology for what is effectively a management and human problem that needs to be solved, and humans are responsible, not technology.
Now, Bill, you talked about the pandemic in your opening statements, but can you talk about more about how the pandemic will impact future audits, specifically with all this money that the federal government is putting into different programs and the resulting recession from the pandemic? Is that going to make audits more difficult than they already are for the Defense Department, or does that not really change?
Well, it matters for DOD as well as the whole federal government, for sure. The oversight that we need over that massive hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, is going to be important. And where does this money come from at the end of the day? Along those lines, I'm just going to relate one of my rants about federal government accounting in general. We have a balance sheet in the federal government's financial report, which should be coming out soon, by the way, the annual financial report, which includes a lot of information about DOD that's worth understanding. But the overall balance sheet for the federal government of the United States, you have $4 trillion in assets, 24 trillion or so of reported liabilities, which we believe are severely understated relative to what should be the accounting. But putting that aside, 4 trillion minus 24 trillion leaves you with a pretty big hole. However, our federal government gives us the following two comforting sentences in describing the balance sheet. There are, however, other significant resources, they say, available to the government beyond the assets presented in these balance sheets. They include the government's government's sovereign powers to tax and to set monetary policy. In other words, we should be comforted that our government's going to be okay because it can take our money away or inflate the value of the dollar away to deal with its debt, which isn't all that comforting, especially because this is a document that, in theory, for the DOD and the rest of the government, is a document that should help secure the accountability of the government to the people, we the people of the United States. And they're telling us not to worry because the government possesses the sovereign power to tax. I don't deny the government has the sovereign power to tax, but it has the power to tax, but who is the sovereign in the United States? We have a government of popular sovereignty, a limited government, and the people are sovereign, not the government. So I think it's ironic. And I hope they get rid of those sentences. I'm sorry, this is not quite DOD audit, but I couldn't resist. And the DOD is part of the system. The DOD failures to live up to its accountability in accounting are part of this problem.
Mandy, anything to add about the pandemic or the recession?
No, I think I would just reiterate what Bill said in his initial comments, that one of the important aspects is for auditors to be able to be on site and to be able to access this information. There have been some reports about proposed cuts, for example, to the Naval Audit Service, which would reduce this. That's not on the financial audit side, but this is a key oversight function on reducing the ability, as we're initially also talking about significantly increasing the shipbuilding budget, to not be able to see whether we're spending this money responsibly. So I am worried that the many costs of the pandemic are going to create pressures to cut oversight that is needed to make sure that we are making investments the way that we should and responsibly.
In banking, again, the lessons are, you got to get out in the field and kick the tires. You've got to get out and see if the collateral you think you have is really worth what you think it is. Same thing with auditing in government and at the Pentagon. The field visits are very important, and they were curtailed significantly last year. The upcoming year, that's going to improve, I hope, and we'll see what happens.
Great. All right. What is your opinion on zero-based budgeting for every department?
I'll go ahead and let Bill go first. I don't have strong opinions on that one, since I primarily just look at the Department of Defense.
Well, the zero-based budgeting, it can be, an element of DoD audit remediation efforts, in the sense that with zero-based budgeting, you start at zero and justify everything on an annual basis. Speaking of legacy systems, not just in technology, but how many legacy systems do we have in DoD that we could perhaps examine sternly for their usefulness and whether or not they're actually just a sunk cost that we need to sustain legacy systems in DoD that aren't necessarily worthy of the return on investments, our dollars spent in better efforts. And so that's where zero-based budgeting, where you start at zero and justify everything from scratch, is possibly a useful tool. But zero-based budgeting is just one tool. It's not, more fundamentally, we need an energetic effort at financial management and auditing in the Pentagon, basically, as a general rule, not a trick system, new thing. That you're not going to have a magic wand with zero-based budgeting.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is that you need to have, in that kind of system, you would need to have real rigor. And obviously what the Department of Defense has been able to hide behind in a number of instances is, but we need this for national security. And that's, kind of the beginning, middle, and the end of the conversation. And I think when we're looking at the different needs that we have across our federal government, that we need to be asking the Pentagon to think a little bit harder and to make more of a justification when we think that there are a number of areas where we could see significant reductions without jeopardizing our national security.
Right. Okay, moving on to overseas contingency operations. Can you talk about what those are, and are there any auditing issues with that?
Absolutely.
Or related to that?
Yeah. So
Mandy talked about this yesterday.
I did. So overseas contingency operations, one of the main issues has been using that budget area to circumvent the caps under the Budget Control Act. And what we have seen is that by using that kind of release valve repeatedly, both Congress and the department are able to get funding for programs that honestly would normally not make the cut, that there's less transparency as to what the real costs are of starting programs when they are part of that account, and that generally it's bad budgeting practice. We've been relying on OCO for so long that it seems like just the normal thing to do. But for our past conflicts, we only used supplemental or emergency spending for the first few years when we didn't understand what the costs of the wars we were starting would be. I think 20 years in, we have a pretty good understanding of what kind of conflict that we're in. And we even see the department designating parts of the overseas contingency operations account as part of enduring costs. So the department knows too. So we just need to get to a system where we're using the budget as it should be used.
Bill, anything to add on that?
No, I'm looking forward to Mandy's further work in that area. I think it's pretty important. I'm afraid that as she has expressed concern, the ways in which the account can be used as a evasive mechanism for not following your budget practices is disheartening, and it opens the door for corruption and waste that we need to address.
So the next question is about, I guess, transparency. Are the Defense Department's financial statements and the audit report publicly available? And I will tack on to that, if they are publicly available, are they easy to read and accessible?
That last question is maybe the most important of all. The answer is no, but we'll get to there in a minute. I can share my screen if you want and show people how to get to this stuff. Let's go.
Sure, go for it.
Let's do that now. One useful place to get started is, here's the financial report of the US government. Here's a page at the Department of Treasury. And here you have down here the current report at the front page of this financial report of the US government page. But what I'm going to show you now for DoD is the following page. This is the DoD's controller's website. The Undersecretary of Defense or controller for, this is the chief accounting officer at the Pentagon. And on this website, down here, you see the quick links. I'm going to sneak a look at the DoD component financial statements. And here we have, this is what we dove into in developing our DoD audit report card. Here we have DoD financial statements going back to 1998 for the Department of the Army, Department of the Air Force, Department of the Navy, Military Retirement Fund, Army Corps of Engineers, the one that actually has a clean opinion, is available here. This showed up for 2017. I apologize. Let's go home and get the. Here's the page with 2020, the overall DoD agency financial report. The overall report is here with an audit opinion. That's a disclaimer of opinion. And then you have the individual entities, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Defense Contract Audit Agency. That's the contract auditing agency that Mandy referred to. The Defense Finance and Accounting Service. The Department of Defense Inspector General has its own financial statements, which in fact had more issues this year than last year, interestingly. So the IG itself was having more issues on its own accounting, which is a little interesting. The Military Retirement Fund, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Here's all the entities, and you can get in there and dive in. And one thing that's a useful thing to do in financial markets, the companies issue their financial reports. I think it's from a stock market analysis perspective, it's always good to do a good job of reading that letter to shareholders by the leader of the company. The same thing is true in these entities, to get a feel for the tone at the top about how seriously or not they take the audit effort. That's a softer, fuzzier, but important judgment process for evaluating whether or not we're really getting a genuine effort on improving the audit results. Another website, if you want it, here's the IG has developed in the last 3 years a summary of the overall department-wide audit effort. As an example, understanding the results of the audit of the DoD fiscal year 2019 financial statements. This report, this is last year's version, unfortunately, but you can get it for this year too, which just came out. This is a good summary of the audit every year that's put together by the DoD Inspector General's office. Let's look at one more thing along those lines. Going back to the overall US government's financial report. Here's the whole report. 270 pages. That gets into the second part of Courtney's question, which is how hard or easy is this stuff to understand? It's very hard to understand. Footnote 13, check this one out for an interesting footnote. Environmental and disposal liabilities. Let's go take a look at what this is. Here's the overall balance sheet for the US government. The dollar amount in 2019 anyway was $595 billion of liability. What is that stuff? That's in footnote 13. Let's go look at it. Here they are. Environmental and disposal liabilities, $505 billion worth was in the Department of Energy. The Department of Defense had $76 billion of, what is this? This is associated with massive cleanup costs facing US citizens and taxpayers for past nuclear weapons testing. $505 billion of that is on the books, not of the Department of Defense, but the Department of Energy. A reminder that really true quote unquote defense spending is much, much bigger than the DoD budget all by itself. This is actually an issue from auditing perspective. How do we come up with this number? It's a very, very hard number to calculate. Another uncertain dollar amount that's actually reported at, with a decimal point, but how, what's the range of uncertainty we have around this estimate, especially in a world where we really don't even have the technology yet that needs to be developed to clean up some of the mess. Have a nice day. That's just a review of some of the ways you can go find information. I'll do one more along those lines, a broader federal government issue. There are times, again, the second part of your question, Courtney, which was so interesting, how hard is this to understand? It's very hard to understand, but for instance, AIG, the American International Group, the huge insurance company that went belly up in 2008, 2009, it had massive, complicated financial statements that were hard to understand. But there are times when you can do simple things to get perspective on the problem you're facing. Let's just count the number of times the word unsustainable appears in the financial report of the US government. It's in there 16 times. This is in discussions like the one that we see right in front of us, an unsustainable fiscal path. Well, this discussion, it relates to the overall financial condition of the United States government, the DoD being a big driver of those expenses. Let's take a look at another resource to get some perspective about that. This is our Data Z website. I'm going to create a chart, a federal chart, and there's a section in here that we have not just federal financial data, but down here at the bottom, rhetoric analysis. I counted the number of times the word unsustainable appears in the federal government's financial report every year since 1998. Let's go take a look. I'm going to make a chart, go back to 1998, and what's happened to the word unsustainable since 1998?
Wow.
That's a red flag. Okay, I've gone on too long. I apologize. It got a little afield, but
Thank you.
there's some resources that you can use to get into federal government and Defense Department finances.
Thank you for that, Bill. Mandy, was there anything else you would want to add about that, about just accessibility and transparency of these financial documents? I know POGO does a lot of work on that.
Yeah, I would say these documents, as Bill is saying, they're available if you know where to look for them. They're not necessarily easy to understand. Something else that we've been advocating as well is we'd like to see more contract transparency as well. And that is, there are a number of areas where we see the contract announcements, but having a better understanding of what the terms are and how to hold the department accountable for the management of those contracts would be a significant benefit for transparency and accountability.
Right. So going off on that point, have you noticed much difference in how the audits or the financial statements are handled for contractors versus, just defense employees? Putting aside, the how the contracts are gotten, but in the accounting process, I wonder, is there significant challenges or different challenges for contractors?
So some of my colleagues just did a story on a Department of Defense Inspector General report where this was on a contract audit where there was $100 million worth of question costs. It used to be that our oversight agencies would tell us who the companies were that might have improperly charged us $100 million. In this case, the Department of Defense Inspector General redacted the names. We were able to find out it was Lockheed and Boeing. So what we're seeing is that while there are some legitimate concerns about proprietary information for some of these contractors, that the department reads those far too broadly, and that we're really concerned that they're not adequately honoring their role as overseers to hold those companies accountable, particularly if they might be overcharging taxpayers.
Great. Bill, anything to add about contractors or contracting and their audits?
Well, you can get in trouble and you can have success both with the Pentagon is making make or buy decisions all the time. Should I do it within the DoD or should I contract with an outside entity? And again, I'm sitting in the city of Chicago land, and I'm afraid government is sometimes used as a vehicle for privatizing gains and in ways that are gained to engineer profits at the expense of the average citizen. And that isn't just a Chicago thing. It's through that contracting process that this can happen. That's why we need to oversee it.
Okay, this next question from an audience member says, while I agree financial reporting can be improved, how can the government's financial reporting be meaningful if conventional accounting terms can be very difficult to apply to military bases, missiles, et cetera, et cetera?
Do you want to go ahead and start, Bill?
No, that's a hard question. It's a good one though, too. The military, I believe, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Granted, you're faced with a challenging task in accounting for military activities, but that doesn't mean you can't try. And so we need to do a better job of trying. That's the way I would answer that question.
I think it's also a matter of looking at internal controls. How much are we, keeping track of things like spare parts and where things are? Some of these audits have found that we don't even know where some of our property is. Obviously in our own homes, as messy as they may be, we have a general sense of where everything is that we bought. And when we aren't, properly keeping track of these things, that means that we're buying things over and over again. And that's just resulting in waste that it doesn't benefit us.
Got it. Okay, next question. Is the Defense Department making any improvements on reducing the use of, quote, forced balance reconciliations in its accounts? And if you could define what forced balance, that would also be great.
Can you repeat the question a little
Sure.
slower and harder?
Is the Defense Department making any improvements on reducing the use of forced balance reconciliations in its accounts?
Well, they are, because the auditing process evaluates and recommends ways to not abuse this possibility. And in the sense that, they're making progress, they're identifying to a greater degree how often this happens. A forced balance, what is it? It's when you just plug for stuff you don't know, basically in accounting. And that's been a significant issue. But at least the awareness and management of that issue is gotten better in recent years. There could be a long way to go, however, on that score.
Great. So Going back to, Mandy, what you said earlier about the Pentagon not having a permanent inspector general for years now. I know the Defense Department audit situation has been a challenge for multiple administrations, Democratic and Republican, but under Trump, we had a lot of vacancies in the Defense Department, a lot of turnover. And I wonder, could that have had any impact on their financial auditing process? Again, I know this is a long-term issue, but I wonder if still that could impact anything at all.
So I actually think the American people were very lucky because David Norquist, who was leading this effort first as comptroller and then as Deputy Secretary of Defense, stayed throughout the administration. And he, throughout he's been very thoughtful on managing concerns that certain audit firms might get monopolies that would lead to coziness and not having integrity in the audit process. So while I think that was a challenge for other parts of the department to have so many vacancies, Mr. Norquist endured, and I think he's really tried to do as much as he can to help this administration to continue to build on his progress.
That's a great point, Mandy. And in fact, it relates to Courtney's job. With Government Executive Magazine, I mean, amidst all the depressing / angerifying news in this area, there are good examples out there, Mr. Norquist, and there are others that serve as good examples for the rest of the department. And maybe in future work, not to recommend a job for you, but you could do articles on some of the good stories and the good people that are making progress in this area. Mr. Norquist would be one of the first to identify along those lines.
And the only other thing I would add is that he helped to get the Department of Homeland Security to be auditable. So he was using his experience from the Bush administration and applying that again. So knew the size and scope of the problem and was, reapplying
it's a huge effort, but he was a good starter. He was a good for all of us.
We probably don't give him enough credit for getting DHS into shape.
Do you happen to know how long it took DHS to become audit ready or to pass an audit?
I don't know. It's several years, especially with the way.
It wasn't overnight.
Yeah, I imagine. Great. Next question. I am particularly interested in as a journalist. Do citizens of the United States or any person or entity in the United States have any way to compel the Defense Department to answer questions or demonstrate steps and practices, steps and to pass an audit, or are we relegated to asking questions that are not answered?
I will quickly plug. POGO thinks it's important that citizens do engage much more on these issues, and we have a civic engagement program that I would encourage people to check out on our website, pogo.org, if they're interested. And I'll quickly.
What is that called again, Mandy? What is it?
It's our civic engagement program. So we're trying to help citizens to be able to hold the Department of Defense accountable. Particularly, I think the best mechanism is largely by encouraging members of Congress to have a spine and to stand up for citizens' interests. And I will also quickly plug our newsletter, The Bunker, written by Mark Thompson, that kind of helps to keep citizens informed on what's going on at the department so that they can feel knowledgeable about talking in these areas. I think it can be very intimidating for a lot of people to talk in this space, as we've talked through audits terms and everything else. But I think that common sense goes a tremendously long way in this arena. And that is, if lawmakers think that citizens actually care in this space, I think it can make a big difference. They hear a lot from the needs of defense contractors, but don't hear very often from their citizens. So especially as a former congressional staffer, I always encourage people to be very active.
No, I think that's great, and we need more things like that civic engagement project idea. I'm going to look into that some more after this conversation. I'm reminded though of a cautionary note from the past. There's a Supreme Court case in the United States, U.S. versus Richardson, where a taxpayer tried to assert standing in getting the budget for the CIA. And the United States Supreme Court ruled that an individual taxpayer doesn't have standing in a case like that. So there are ways in which legally there are certainly obstacles for individuals to pursue in this area. Having said that, informal persuasive efforts with Congress can be even more important than legal means for exercising our rights as citizens and taxpayers.
And the only other thing,
I'm reminded of a lesson that we didn't learn from the savings and loan crisis in the 1980s, as well as the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Again, I get good perspective from banking history that matters here. We basically got our lunch handed to us, in part because we acted as a backstop, a source of safety net for the financial markets, and we didn't do a good job as citizens and taxpayers in living up to our own obligations to ourselves and making sure that the government was doing what it told us when it said that it stabilized things. The same thing is true in defense. As citizens and taxpayers, we can't just sit back and pretend that we're powerless. We aren't. We are citizens, and we can exercise our voice.
Great. Next question from an audience member. Do you think the lack of financial accountability at the Defense Department is a threat to national security? In either a direct or indirect way, would you say?
I think it is. I think particularly when we're not some of the areas where I get the most concern is when we have inadequate accountability when it comes to developing new weapon systems, and when there are efforts to try and push these systems before we know that they're safe, before we know that they're effective. And all of this is contributing to a culture where there's insufficient accountability. And we never want to have service members die preventable deaths because we didn't do the work that we should have been doing to properly manage these programs. And when we have waste in other parts of the department, the fact of the matter is that frequently the money comes from things like training. It comes from things that actually directly supports our troops. And so I think it's really important to understand the patriotic thing to do is to hold the Department of Defense accountable.
Including, well, my short answer is yes. I think that's a great question. Yes, it is a matter of national security. And along the lines of what Mandy was just talking about, I think the whistleblower protection angle is a key element to that, to the extent to which we can have a culture where there's a great book by this organizational economist, Albert O. Hirschman. This book is titled Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. And what do you do in an organization where you see things that need to be rectified? If you believe and you have good information about it, you can either leave the organization or you can stay with the organization and exercise your voice. And what are the costs and benefits of doing that to individuals, with loyalty being the determining factor? Do you stick around and try to work for the better? Whistleblowing fits into that framework in an interesting and important way, that to what extent the Department of Defense, along with other departments in the federal government, can do a better job of inspiring people to seek and speak the truth and not squelch uncomfortable findings, is an important element of improving the productivity and our national security provided by the Department of Defense.
Great. And going off on the national security angle, in Truth and Accounting's now third annual report on the DoD audit, it said that the service branches did so poorly in the audit. Can you talk about why you think this is, this keeps repeating, and if that has any more impact on national security?
Well, the main service branches are also among the largest entities, which is on the one hand, more of a challenge for them to get the right accounting in place. Having said that, because they're larger entities, that makes good accounting more important, not less important. And so we're hoping to see better improvement in the service agencies in the results of the audit, as well as in the culture of promoting the audit as a tool of management and respecting it, not putting it in second place.
Mm-hmm. Great. Mandy, anything to add on that point?
No, I think, it just goes back to some of those other cultural kinds of issues too that we talked about too, where the services tend to be focused on other parts of their mission. And this, I think, becomes sometimes a collateral duty that they understand that they have to do, but not necessarily, or they're not necessarily so enthusiastic about it.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So now on the auditing process itself, how much does the Defense Department spend on this audit? Do you have any idea how many auditors are involved? And if you could talk through some of the logistics, I think that would be interesting to hear.
Well, who does the audit? It's an interesting, the DoD IG Inspector General issues the overall audit report. for the agency as a whole, but there are a wide variety of private firms, private accounting firms that are contracted to engage the department and do the audits at the department, at the entity level, underneath the agency level. Those private firms are both a good thing and a bad thing that has to be managed. You've got the possibility that they're getting money and not delivering on the contract, just like the contracting issues in general that Mandy was talking about. But having said that, we respect the fact that the private accounting firms are involved. We think that's a good, source of outside discipline on internal management issues. And so we believe in that contracting process per se.
Got it.
There are hundreds of auditors, individual people doing this. It's a huge effort, and it's something like $1 billion. I don't know the exact number, but it's
I think it's about $1 billion a year.
Oh, wow.
That's just auditing financial statements. That's not even spending money on quote, but it is defense. It is national security. Having a good, reliable set of financial statements for the Department of Defense is in our best interest for our national security.
Mm-hmm. And I do think it's kind of interesting and possibly concerning that the Defense Department's Inspector General's office has issues with their financial statements. So if that's a problem, then who's overseeing the watchdog?
Well, again, this gets to more general issues, but I'm afraid our Congress has a great deal of responsibility for being the ultimate arbiter. The GAO, the audit arm of Congress, that's the entity that produces the audit opinion and the disclaimer of opinion on the federal government's financial statements. So the GAO is the auditor in that sense, but the GAO is the audit arm of Congress. At the end of the day, the power of the purse resides in the Congress of the United States of America. And they're the ones we need to hold most accountable and not maybe allowing individual members of Congress that are focused more on the needs of defense contractors as opposed to the citizens and taxpayers of the United States in national security and in wisely spending our money. We need a better Congress, I'm saddened to say.
Have there been any initiatives in recent years, either bills introduced that maybe didn't get passed or specific lawmakers that have been very active on this issue? Have either of you noticed anything like that?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of engagement and it's very bipartisan. So we've seen Senator Grassley and Senator Sanders, usually not two people you associate with each other, who've focused on the audit issue. Representative Barbara Lee, Representative Ralph Norman have also been focused on these issues as well. So we've seen a fair amount of engagement. And in particular, some of these amendments have been trying to add accountability measures for the failure to be auditable, to more clearly rank how the different services are doing, to kind of try and create competitive pressure on them to do better on this issue space. A lot of these things end up getting killed behind closed doors in conference, but there is a lot of bipartisan interest in this, and at least on the and then obviously on the Inspector General side of things, there are a number of bills looking at how to enhance independence of the IGs and to encourage presidents to appoint well-qualified leaders for those offices.
Senator Grassley has been a long-standing, positive, productive leader in this area, and it's consistent with not only his respect for the importance of the audit process for the Pentagon, but Senator Grassley has also been a leader in developing or trying to develop stronger whistleblower protection in general in the United States government, including in the DoD. So going back to history, there's another possible article for you, Courtney, a government executive, well, Senator Grassley and his contributions in this area. I think that's one person to focus on. Oh,
yes, we do a lot of reporting on Senator Grassley's actions. As he's, very crucial for whistleblower and IG legislation. But going back to whistleblowers, I know that it's been traditionally kind of difficult to either pass legislation for whistleblowers, particularly in the defense and the intelligence arena, because so much of what they do is classified. So can you talk about how, I know this is kind of a general question, but how to kind of mitigate some of those challenges if there are whistleblowers who, might want to disclose things, but there is the issue of classified information?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things is to understand when whistleblowers are sharing this information, what we're trying to create is a system of protected channels so that information that is classified or sensitive can be protected, but that we're making sure that the overseers, like Congress, like the inspectors general, can get that information. One of the problems is that if we don't strengthen those channels and provide meaningful protections, when people are concerned that they aren't going to be able to solve a problem any other way, they're more likely to go to the press and to go to other channels where that information won't be safeguarded in the same way, but where they might actually have the ability to have meaningful change. And so, you know, in some of those cases that, it is the right thing to do, though, there are going to be severe consequences for that individual for coming forward. But that's why it's important to create safe, protected channels, because then we can protect the information and we can address the problems in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Bill, do you have anything to add on that point?
I think that's a great lesson to learn from. Thank you, Mandy. No, you've got to respect the integrity of national security sensitive information. And at the same time, you have to develop a way in which individuals can help the overseers do their job without impairing the integrity of the information. And the secrecy isn't always evil. Sometimes it's an important benefit for all of us, and an underappreciated one. But because it's so important, it needs to be respected, and secrecy can't be used as a vehicle for hiding the truth when it really matters.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Now, as we're heading towards the end of the session, I guess if you could give me either your biggest takeaway from this year's audit or the IG review, or what do you think the biggest lesson learned was? I guess what would be if you had to, I don't know, just summarize it in one takeaway or several, a few, just what would it be? Kind of your biggest reaction.
It's a glass half full, glass half empty story. We're making progress, but there's a long way to go. We're still on a learning curve in the auditors and the entities in working on the audit. That is something that probably should have been done 20 years ago, but at least we're moving in the right direction. And Mr. Norquist was a valuable spark in getting this process going.
Yeah, I would agree that there's been progress, but now I think it's important to talk about, is there adequate accountability? And I think one of the places that we need to look is we need to start reducing the Defense Department's budget and help them to understand the need to be more responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. So I think if we don't see more meaningful accountability measures, that the progress is still going to kind of limp along.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And how are you feeling about the President Biden's budget that will be released, in the next month or so? We might get a peek at it next week. Are you feeling optimistic that with what he proposes and maybe what Congress will eventually pass, will, make it easier to audit and just, keep going with this full process?
I think citizen and civil society engagement is going to be important for us to get a budget that is what we need it to be. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing the opening salvo, but I think there are opportunities for reductions.
I'm afraid I'm not very optimistic about the budget these days. And as citizens and taxpayers, we all have a vested interest in exercising our voice in this area.
Definitely. Well, I think we are out of time now. Bill, Mandy, thank you so much for all your insight. And to our audience members, thank you for joining us. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.